So I go. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here at my very first Drupal developer days, and I'm not a developer, so even more thank you. I have a talk for you this afternoon stroke evening about Drupal CMS. I'm going to talk to you about the insights that UX gives us and how that develops Drupal CMS. So here's the outline for what we're going to cover. I'm going to talk a bit about me, UX, because that's what I do, and how that folds into Drupal CMS. Bit of a recap on what Drupal CMS is, what it's for, who it's for, what the vision of it is, and how UX research feeds into that. And then I'm going to do a bit of a deeper dive into some of the aspects of the Drupal CMS UX research program. So take us back to version 1 and cover what we learned from that, and then think about our current priorities, which I'm going to split into installation onboarding, content handling, and also innovation. All right, so I'm Emma Horrell. I've got a number of roles within the Drupal community. UX research lead in Drupal CMS is the one I'm kind of talking about today. I also share Drupal Manager in Drupal core with Christina Chemias. I advise on the Drupal AI initiative, and I'm a UX contributor, right? Jürgen very kindly mentioned me in the keynote yesterday, working on ECA. I've also worked on Drupalisms. And way back when, I started working on Promote Drupal. And the latest thing that's kind of worrying me in the Drupal community is this next big thing, which is leading the Drupal Higher Education Summit for DrupalCon Rotterdam. And from these pictures, very kindly taken by Paul Johnson, I spend a lot of time talking. I do other stuff as well as talking, but I do like talking. So what do I actually do? Well, I spend a lot of time learning Drupal because, as I said, I work in UX. Development is not really my comfort zone, but I try and push myself regularly out of my comfort zone. So my learning curve looks a little bit like this. It kind of goes up and down, and I do wonder if it ever will plateau, where I'll ever feel I'm kind of on the road to mastery. But that's why I'm here, I guess. I like the ups and downs, and I like to keep learning as I go. Okay, so that's about me. What about Drupal CMS? I think people know what Drupal CMS is, but just to establish what I'm going to talk about today, Drupal CMS is a product. What the aim of Drupal CMS is to encapsulate all the decisions that have been made in Drupal, I guess, over time, which are the good modules, which are the key functionalities, bundle that all together in a product that aims to reach new audiences. So what we're trying to do with Drupal CMS is reach people who don't know Drupal, and we're telling them they don't have to learn it to appreciate what it does. And that's the goal and the ethos, I guess, of Drupal CMS. And I hope you like my kind of Athens-inspired slide here, because Drupal CMS is built on Drupal core. It's not separate from Drupal core, so as I said, it brings key things together: project browser, automatic updates, Drupal core recipes. And we're aiming to reach beyond the people who know and love Drupal, like ourselves in the room. We're aiming at content professionals, marketing people. That's what this product is all about. So part of what folds into Drupal CMS in terms of the mission is flattening the curve. What do I mean by that? Well, when people decide, I want a website, those marketing and content professionals, they've usually got a visual in their head of what they want to see online, and that's their website. And they'll look around for site building platforms to do that with. Drupal will be there, but so will lots of other site building platforms that make it easier for them to get started. And do you know what happens? They get to a point with those site building platforms and they realize they've run out of what they could do. They want to do more stuff, but they're then stuck because they've put lots of effort and time into building what they've built on those site building platforms. And if they'd just started with Drupal, the sky would have been the limit and they could have kept going. And that's kind of where we're trying to aim the easier starting point of Drupal CMS. We're trying to catch people so that they start off with Drupal so that we can then show them all the good stuff that we know we have and that what makes us a better product than what else is out there. So stretch goals for Drupal CMS. Over time, we're starting a kind of high code position, I guess. This is stolen from Pam Barone, who's the product owner of Drupal CMS. She put out a roadmap, kind of like understanding what we're aiming for over time as we go through the successive versions, right? So we start out on high code. We eventually want to progress towards low code. And all the while, we're trying to make tasks easier and easier. So we're trying to make it easier and easier for people to do things within Drupal, as well as opening up the extra capabilities that make us the differentiator from those other site building platforms. So where does UX research come into this? Well, I see, for me, working in UX research, I see what can I do to turn that vision of Drupal Starshot as it started out to where we are today, which was recently launched, Drupal CMS 2.1, launched in Chicago about a month ago. So in the beginning, we did a lot of work around Drupal Starshot to understand who are we building this for again. And it may sound trite, but we asked this question over and over and over. We needed to get in our heads the names and the kind of feel of the people that we're building this for. Like, who are we trying to reach with this product? What do they actually want to do when they're building sites? What matters to them? What are they saying day in, day out? But also, how do they do it now? Because people tend to not change their behavior. So a really good indicator of what people want from a product like Drupal CMS or from a site builder is to look at how they're solving these problems now. And as it turned out, they were using some of these different products. So that factored into the early part of the UX research. What UX research is about, a lot of people, and I myself actually, when I came into it, thought it would be quite easy to ask people what they want from something, and they'll just tell you. But it doesn't really work like that. As humans, we tend to say things, and we sometimes mean other things. So what I spend a lot of my time doing is listening to people. So I will interview people who, potential users of Drupal CMS and different features, and I'll listen to what they say, and here's some examples. So this target audience, they might talk about Figma prototypes. They might say, well, on our website, we're not calling people clients, we're calling them guests. The most important thing is that this comes up in search. I'm not sure about this new brand that we have, there's a color contrast issue. So these are things that they will say. And as I've worked in technology for a while, I'm trying to extrapolate what that means, what the underlying need is, what the feature is, maybe what the kind of need is, what the problem is that they're trying to solve. So when they're talking about Figma prototypes, that's making me think, okay, so they're used to designing using visual tools like Figma. If they're talking about making changes to content and words, that's a content change mechanism. The color contrast thing, okay, well that falls into the category of accessibility. Page building, third-party tool integration. So this kind of technique is something we've used repeatedly in trying to work out what the UX is telling us and what that means as to features. Another thing about UX research is it is very, very firmly rooted in human behavior. John's keynote earlier today talked a lot about psychology and behavior, so my ears were listening into that. And I return to this model a lot when I think about UX, especially with CMS when we're trying to think, how do we reach people we haven't reached before? For people to change their habits, it relies on them having a capability, opportunity, and a motivation. This is called the COMB model, C-O-M-B model. So capability, they'll change their habit if they feel that they can do it, if something's usable, if it's familiar, if it's intuitive. If they have the opportunity to do it, so if everybody else is doing it, if they have peer support, if it's the default option, and if they're motivated to make that change, so they might feel confident, control, or it offers them a learning opportunity. This is the holy grail, this slide, with UX research, because what happens a lot with technology is people will build something, and they'll come to people like me who work in UX, and they'll ask, can you do a UX review on it? And of course we can. But what we then do is ask a lot of irritating questions like, well, who's it for? And what's the context? And what task are they doing? And what problem does it solve? And I appreciate this is a lot sometimes to offload on somebody who's just built something because they wanted to build something, and they maybe thought that have an idea of what it was solving, but don't have all the answers to my annoying questions. So what I try and do working in UX is kind of put out problems out there that I know need solving and use that as a spark for innovation, for development. When that happens and when I can do that more effectively in my role, the things that developers are building are kind of in tune with those bigger problems. And then when it comes to testing them and checking, did they solve the problem? Did they make it better? It's a lot easier. Everybody's a bit more aligned. But it takes work and it takes communication. But it's possible in a community like this where there's a lot of opportunities to share. Where this is folded into structuring a UX research program, and I've felt the need to do that working in Drupal CMS so that I have kind of goals to aim for. So we did the grounding research. We had a good idea of who the audiences were and what we were aiming to do with the product, and then we started to build. And as we started to build, we get lots of interfaces, and that's where like lots of decisions need to make, as in, where should this go? What should we call this? How should we position this? Which module should we use for this? And so on. So there's a kind of layer of interaction decisions, user interface decisions. As well as that, a piece that feeds into the research program of Drupal CMS is knowing what else is going on in the Drupal universe, right? So I know that like so many emergent ideas are sort of springing up all over the Drupalverse, as I call it, and we want to bring that good stuff into Drupal CMS. We can only do that if we understand what it's about and does it fit with the kind of vision for Drupal CMS. So that's kind of another layer that the research program takes. So going back to the beginning for version 1, which was launched in January 2025, this was a starting point. This was collecting together, as I said before, like that foundational model, all the decisions that have been made in Drupal over the years, capturing all of that together into a version 1 and getting something out there. And kind of, for me, this was like Drupal saying, here we have a new product, we want to reach out to new audiences, and we're saving people making these decisions. We're actually putting something out that people can get started with. And for that reason, it's a version 1. It was very difficult to meet the needs of everybody, right? Because we didn't actually know all the needs that people had at that point. So it was putting something out there. As people started to use it, we could start bottoming out the needs and then use those to iterate the product. So some of the questions we had after version 1, after we celebrated the launch, where do we go next? Which features do we focus on? Like, what content types do people want? What do people want from the dashboard? What should go in the installer? And all of this. And we took time to think about that. And I mapped out kind of 3 priority areas to keep chipping away at. And again, this is how I work. I like to have like big goals, big aspirations, and then I kind of break this down into smaller tasks. So the 3 things, I guess, on a kind of roadmap, but not really in that order, just like things to be aiming towards, is firstly getting people who use Drupal CMS to something that looks like a real website, thinking that these are visual designers. They're going to be thinking, show me the website. What does it look like? So that's a goal. They're content people. Content is their currency. So having a really intuitive and a powerful content handling experience so that everything they want to do with content, they can do it. That's another goal to aim for. And then bringing that innovation, bringing the things that Drupal is the differentiator for, that we have in the community that don't exist in other proprietary communities, or maybe even open source communities, like our software. Why is our software so good? Why should they come to us? That's something else to kind of be working towards. I'm going to talk about each of those in turn and give you a flavor of some of the research that I've been involved in and have worked with others on. So starting with that first, getting people to a site quicker, that falls into the installation and onboarding process. In the society we live in, people have very limited times. They want to get things done quickly. So getting people to something that they're familiar with quickly is really important, because you don't want them to leave and go somewhere else. So we did a bunch of research thinking about how we could iterate on this. And actually what came out of this was announced last year, DrupalCon Atlanta, March 2025, was the idea of site templates. So these were almost like taking the product of Drupal CMS another level. So it was saying, this is the product, but actually, how do we make that specific for particular use cases so that people can get started quicker? And so site templates were the idea as a starter kit. And what a site template does is like take together content types, integrations, contrib modules, config, a theme, and default content. So it's a kind of pre-packaged bundle, something that's very similar to a site that somebody can see, make a decision on, and they can instantly see how it can fit their use case to draw people in. Again, that kind of installation and onboarding process, get them off to a good start. The idea for site templates was that they would first of all be part of a marketplace, part of the marketplace initiative, but also they would be available through that installation process. So when they go through the progress bar, they've installed Drupal CMS, they then actually have something that's like a site. Version 2, Drupal CMS, that was launched in January, that had 3 site templates. This was a blank one, a starter one, and Byte, which was a kind of SaaS, like IT services type based template, and that was based on a design system that Media Current started off, a company that worked with us, and they called that design system Mercury. Recently launched version 2.1, has 11 site templates, and this will give you a bit of a demo. So you go through that progress bar now when you install Drupal CMS, multiple ways to do that, and you're instantly getting, okay, I can see there might be a site there for me that fits my need. And more site templates are on the way, but this is just the start. The other way that people can access those site templates, if they don't choose to install Drupal CMS, they can now go to a marketplace. The marketplace initiative was led by Tiffany Farris from Palantir. And when this was being developed off the back of being announced in Atlanta, they did a lot of research. They put out surveys into the community. And I love a survey because there's an opportunity to learn from people. So I asked if I could have a question at the end of those surveys, which was a simple, would you talk to me about your needs for a marketplace? And the people that I heard from through interviews kind of fell into two categories. There were people who were interested in a marketplace because they could build templates and get them out there. And there were also people interested in actually using templates. And they each gave different perspectives. And these are just kind of summary. So from the template builders side, people would be motivated to contribute and add a template into the marketplace because it would help them get client requests. It could bring in leads, they could sell them, and it would give them recognition in the community. It gets your piece of Drupal out there through a marketplace, through a kind of public platform. From the template user side, the benefits of these templates for them is to avoid starting from scratch, to have to go through all the effort of building a site, theming, choosing content types, everything that's encapsulated in a site template. It might not be the end result, but it gets them close. It's a starting point that they can then adapt. They could then learn, they'd also want to, if they were going to use them, learn about who built them, so like learn about the provenance, understand kind of what lies under the hood, and have the option of support if they were using it and they wanted to learn more. So the marketplace, which is now available at the URL marketplace.drupal.org, please check it out. There are the same 11 templates are available. And just to show you how this looks, this is the healthcare, one of the healthcare templates that was contributed by Canopy Studios, Jim Birch. So you get a visual. You've got the option there to kind of copy the composer file. There's a lot of text on this one. It then gives you an outline of the features. You've got the accessibility rating, privacy information. And again, this is version 1 of presenting this data to people. This hasn't had UX work. This is putting this out to see, this is what the community said they wanted from different templates. Here's the support options. And you also have the options as like FAQs. All needs to be tested, but it's a starting point. It's putting something out there that people can use to make a choice about a site to get them started off with Drupal, and then you have the provenance if you made it as well. Going to flip on to talking, how am I doing for time? Not too bad, okay. About content. As I said, content is the currency of the anticipated user audiences for Drupal CMS. So there's a lot that goes into how you present content and editing options. These are just a few screenshots. There are many of different ideas, thinking about how we present all the many different content ways that we have within Drupal. I've written a blog post about that if you're interested, and these slides will be available at the end. But just that kind of concept idea, I spend a lot of time showing people interfaces, seeing what they make of them to see if they understand the content options that are available. So it's a kind of ongoing target to present. One thing that has changed how we think about how we present what's available is, of course, Drupal Canvas. This was launched in December last year. And here are some sort of screenshots which don't really do it justice. Again, please check it out. It's available to check out on Drupal Forge if you don't want to install it. But it basically, that visual experience, like aligning to tools like Figma, where people can actually see the page, they can identify a region of the page to edit, and then they can edit that and in the actual interface without having to save it, preview it, and go through all of that. It makes a difference for people who really want to make quick content changes and know what they want from their content in a visual way. One of the challenges we have with Canvas and its integration into Drupal CMS is Drupal CMS is a moving target. You know, we don't have just Canvas as a way to edit content in Drupal CMS. The node editing is still available. So when it comes to putting together an interface for users, that's something you have to kind of factor in. So At the moment, what we do is we have pages that they can select to get the Drupal canvas pages and CMS to edit the node pages. I'll show you what that looks like. And this is a challenge to communicate. Why is it not playing? There it goes. This is a challenge to communicate to people who are not familiar with Drupal. Everybody in the room knows about node editing forms, I would imagine. So, you can understand when you see that it's instantly recognizable. For somebody who's uninitiated, they might think, okay, so I can edit. If I go into CMS, I can get that editing screen. If I go into Pages, I go into kind of follow the same mental model. And then when I go to edit, I get a different interface. Why is that? So this is something that is really challenging to solve. And I've done some user research on this, but it leads a lot more. People don't really understand what CMS is. They don't really understand the difference between pages. But again, it's difficult to design something that's going to fit all of the needs for something that's moving. And Drupal CMS is evolving all the time, as is Drupal Canvas. So it's an ongoing challenge and also an opportunity to kind of, which is one we come back to all the time, where we're trying to showcase Drupal in a kind of easy to absorb way. Some of the Canvas has been out there since December. Lots of feedback about it, which is brilliant. That helps us make it better. So this is just a snapshot. I sent out a survey. I told you I loved a survey to get some user feedback about Canvas. There's also been feedback through the Slack channel and people just contacting the team. So some of the needs that are being surfaced is the need to include complex props and fields, multilingual, of course, supporting entity references, people wanting to lock down parts of the interface, the migration, the movement from layout builder to paragraph to get into Canvas, and some people have used the chatbot UI, which I haven't demoed, but that was kind of quite narrow and restricted. When you're dealing with lots of text, that's something to be improved. So there's a roadmap, Drupal-canvas.com, if you want to have a look, and this is just a snapshot from it, but just to illustrate that the restricted slots are on there, so is multilingual translations, and entity reference handling is also on there. So that research is fed in, and we're responding to it. Okay, I'm going to move on to the kind of how we bring all the good stuff that's happening in Drupal and how we sort that and put it into Drupal CMS. And I'm going to talk about two things. I'm going to talk about ECA, and I'm going to talk about the Drupal AI initiative. So I'm going to start with ECA. If you attended Jürgen's talk yesterday, you know what ECA is, and you know what it is anyway, I'm sure. Essentially an engine to run sequences and flows. And in the community, I think, it's fair to say this was traditionally viewed as like few people knew it and knew it well and got a lot of use out of it. But there were other people that could have used it but didn't, because they maybe didn't understand it too well. So DrupalCon Vienna last year, in the Dries note, there was a kind of call to action that ECA was going to go through, leaning towards a kind of next generation of ECA. How can we open this out and make it available to more people? I was sat there, and I love a challenge, and I was like, yes, count me in. I get to work with Jürgen. So I answered that call. And when I first met with Jürgen, I started thinking, okay, I read a bit about it, but I didn't understand it too well. And one of the things that helps me understand things, and if you've worked with me, you'll know this, I'll always ask about what's the context, who's the user, what's the use case. And so I started asking Jürgen this stuff, and I think within days he was already working on this, documenting use cases for ECA. And this really helped, because it just helped to kind of take it from an abstract, very powerful tool to, okay, I see exactly how it could work, modifying forms, handling notifications, handling authentication. Just from reading about it in a context was really helpful. And myself and Jürgen and Mark Dodgson from the Drupal Canvas team over at Acquia, we got together and started ideating about where to start. How could we make a new vision of ECA happen to kind of open it out to different users? Well, the first thing was working out who those users were and who the audiences were. So we knew that people used ECA already, ECA developers. They had needs that they wanted to be changed, improved. We also felt there was a broader kind of technical users layer, but then there was also non-technical users who weren't using ECA. And when it came to kind of picking one of these audiences to work for, of course, all three were important. But perhaps the most challenging one, the one that's going to stretch us the most, was thinking, well, how could we, if we could make ECA to reach non-technical users, this could potentially benefit all three user groups or all three audiences. So that's kind of where we set our goal. And we started then thinking, okay, well, what use case should we work for? And forms are universal. Pretty much everybody has had to build a form or interact with a form or has experienced a good form or a bad form. So we thought about forms, but we thought about, well, okay, we can apply ECA to forms, but what happens if we could bring ECA to forms and it could actually just happen at the form? And it actually turns out it can. You can get ECA. So it's like, show me you're doing ECA without telling me you're doing ECA, right? We could bring ECA and all of those decision points that it can handle and that sequencing complexity to something like a form so that that could actually help the person in their overarching goal of building a form for their website to collect data. What happens behind the scenes, because what you can do from that, hopefully you can see that from the screenshot, at the bottom, you can then access the modeler. So like under the hood, if you like, the modeler's behind the scenes. And that captures that information available for the person that's dealing with the forms, because one thing we kind of is thinking, I suppose, with this audience and thinking how people typically deal with sequences, if you make a sequence that's useful, you tend to want to store it because you want to go back to it and maybe change a part of it or make a copy of it or modify it in some way. So having that captured in the modeler, it wasn't taking the modeler away from people, it was actually giving it to them as a kind of background tool that they could use. This is not probably come up very well on the big screen, but my slides are available afterwards. But just to pick a few aspects out of the UI that we worked together on forming. So there's templates available to avoid, one of the things was a kind of fear of a blank canvas in ECA. Where do I start? So we thought that with a templates feature, if people have made a flow, they can then store it, they can access it again. Progressive disclosure, this is a term we use in design, which you're probably familiar with, but it means like only showing people what they need when they need it, so that you avoid kind of overwhelm and cognitive load. So that factored in to kind of put some stuff away and to make the icons that were there more prominent. A way to orient with multiple models, having a map inset was another kind of addition so that people could work out when they're looking at a big flow, where am I in that flow, to help me kind of go through it. A replay to check for snags. So the execution replay was put in a panel so people could go through, and this would help them understand if parts of the model weren't working. So the work with ECA is ongoing. We've made a really solid start. We're now surfacing more and more use cases, which is helping us be more specific about it. And many of those in relation to the content modeling are going to be very relevant for Drupal CMS. So that's an exciting area that we've kind of learned about and we're continuing to work on. I'm going to talk about AI, and I don't have long, I know, but I will try my best. So the AI initiative is a strategic collaboration with Drupal CMS, and I think one of the challenges has been looking at all of this screen. There's lots of messy screenshots on this slide, and that's deliberate because there is a lot happening in the AI initiative in the initial stages, and some things were experimental, and some things, as Christoph talks about, fall into the innovation strand, some things fall into product strand, and it's been difficult to prioritize when it comes to the UX perspective. There's everything everywhere all at once, and everything kind of could do with some UX for different reasons, and it's all at different stages. So that's been a challenge. One thing that helps me with working with the AI initiative, hearing about all the amazing stuff that's being worked on, and thinking, how is this relevant? How can we bring this to users? What's Drupal CMS? What's not? Is like to remind myself of this curve, actually, and to think of what we're doing regardless of what it is. If you want to apply it to AI in general or a particular feature, it's an emergent technology, so we potentially can be landing this on an audience, and how they will perceive that. They'll have kind of inflated expectations. Once they get more confident, there'll be a trough of disillusionment, enlightenment, and then productivity. And I think I don't know if this is accurate, but reading the room a little bit, I think this is where we are with AI that we're rolling out in terms of features, where people are understanding that it doesn't do everything. They understand that it does do some things. And where we can be most useful, I think, is giving people what they need to make an informed choice. If they have a use case that they think AI might be applicable to, we need to show them how you can set up Drupal AI, how you get to step-by-step choices, how you choose the right tools, and let them make up their mind if this is AI is the right use case for them, if it's applicable in whatever they're working on. So when that comes to Drupal CMS and thinking about how we can best support and take from the AI initiative, one area we started working on last year with Bruno and Angela from 1x Internet, and of course Aidan Foster from Foster Interactive, who, if you've watched the most recent Dries note from Chicago, he features in that and talks about what he does. The AI dashboard and the interfaces to support AI usage are a key thing that we're working on in the AI UX track. So the dashboard, thinking about having everything in one place, so when somebody goes through a decision process to include AI or set it up, they have everything in one place in a dashboard instead of having to go to different places. Model choice is a key factor, choosing the right provider and then choosing the right model for the right use case. And this is a changing area depending on what models do and how the providers that run the models change all of that. And also a way to scan tools. When you get into agentic AI and choosing tools and calling tools, it's a small thing maybe, but it is really important to be able to choose the tools that are available, to scan the tools that are available and think about which ones are most applicable. This is an area that we're still continuing to work on and have been working on since last year. I'm going to talk about the Context Control Center that some of you may have heard of. This was a kind of an idea that was mooted in Vienna, and then it became a reality with a beta launched in Chicago about a month ago. And this has been mainly the work of Kristen Pohl, but again, working with the UX team, Aidan, myself, Bruno, Angela. And essentially what the Context Control Center is all about is when you work with AI and you have to tell it the rules and the guardrails and you have to tell it how it works. It's like a mini CMS for handling all of that data. And the reason, where this came from in terms of thinking how do we structure this, Kristen, Aidan, and myself thought about how we use AI and how we give it the right information and kind of extract it from our own brains. So this is a kind of mocked up scenario where we would interact with something like, Claude, ask Claude a question, Claude would come back and ask for clarification, we'd give it some information, Claude would come back. And thinking that through, we started to sort of tease out, okay, what points does it make sense to give AI information, like Gen AI information or whatever you're using, information, and how do we package that up in the way that AI can read it, and that then the human can still have control about how it's applied across a site. And this helped us really tease out huge lists of items and dependencies that would need to go into something like a context control center. So we started thinking about the what, so giving it what context, and here are just some examples of the kinds of guardrails or information, contextual information you would give an AI if you wanted it to help you do something on your site, or you wanted it to support your editors doing something on your site, for Drupal CMS. We then started thinking further down, well, okay, you wouldn't maybe apply all of the campaign text, you'd maybe apply seasonal campaign text. So then we had a group that were called kind of subcontext. And then we started thinking, well, that's all the what, that's all the rules, but then there'll also be factors about when you apply it. So that came down to scopes. And the scope could be relation to the site or parts of the site, but it could also be to do with particular functionalities, so taxonomies, tags. Could be to do with particular use cases, so you'd need to define all of that. And then thinking about what those use cases look like, we started to think again about what that looked like in real life. And doing all of that thinking over lots and lots of hours and weeks helped us come up with a kind of architecture. And this is quite a poor screenshot. I couldn't get it working properly yesterday. But essentially bundling up your context items and then how they relate to each other, so that subcontext piece, thinking about how those then apply to the use cases, and then scope as well, to think about where it applies in a particular site or a digital app or whatever you're making. to define all that. And there's the link to check out the Context Control Center, have a look at it, install it. We're still working on it. And in fact, we're still working on lots of UX improvements for AI, and it's recently moved to GitLab, so we've moved away from Drupal issues, so that link might not work, but it should hopefully redirect if you're interested in checking out what we're doing. But certainly on the list, reviewing the Context Control Center now, it's been in beta, well, for a month. We maybe don't have too much data, but we still know things that we want to improve with it. The AI dashboard and presenting models, especially thinking about how we present information when providers change their models or deprecate their models. We have the AI Tool Explorer, which Michael Lander worked on, and we're keen to think about how we can leverage the information in tools. The content review is thinking about when you produce content and how content changes. So this is almost looking at life cycles of content and thinking, if you have a change of terminology in the company you work for, you need to strip out the old terminology, replace it with the new. How can you get AI to do that? So these are all kind of very geared towards the content management and the, like all of the jobs that are actually sometimes easy to make mistakes on. As humans, anybody who's worked and edited a website, if we can apply AI to try and take out some of the pain of that, then that could be a useful tool for the audiences of Drupal CMS. And bringing, I guess, two worlds together, ECA flow drop, thinking about agents, orchestrator, and the use cases for that. So there's lots ongoing, but I have 5 minutes until I just need a 5-minute warning, so I would stop there and see if anybody has any questions, or if there's anything you want me to go back to. That's been a whistle stop. And you can access my slides there, or if you've just taken enough information in, because it's day 3, I get that, but you can, of course, reach out to me on Slack, or connect with me on LinkedIn if you'd like to. So I'll open to questions. Thank you. I see no hands. I see one hand. Yes, James.
Hi, I worry a little bit when I see Canvas pages that are full of lots of components with sort of site data, and then pages that have the same data replicated, and it feels like it should be coming from content, entities. Is there sort of a plan to kind of make that more of a
joined up experience?
Yes.
Yes, there is. It's on the Canvas roadmap. Canvas is version 1, and yeah, I don't know if you know the story of Canvas from Experience Builder. It's been a long journey to get to the version 1, but yeah, what's tagged as the kind of entity reference holding, it might not be the right term for it, but certainly that the problem you've described is on the roadmap. I've forgotten exactly the timescale for it being addressed, but it's certainly there, so it's being worked on.
Just one quick question. Nice presentation. Thanks again for all the work. And I just had a question around this feedback you take from not just the community, which is already a lot, but then going to users. And we live in an era of like, we want AI for the sake of AI, and we already had that before AI where users didn't really know what they want. And
yes.
now I think they have even more things they think they want because it's the new thing and we need to have it, and it's also a marketing thing, and I guess we all get it as well because we work in places where it's AI first without really knowing why. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't use AI. It's more like, how do we filter use cases, then translating it into actual features we want, and prioritizing. I don't know if it's even a question. It's more like,
I get what you mean.
Achieve this?
It's a prioritization piece, and I think the difficulty is with prioritizing which AI features are people going to want. You're exactly right. They don't know. But what does stay the same are the problems. So, like having a really good idea of what the knowledge of what the problems are. So in my job, like I connect regularly with people who create content. I hear what they're struggling with, I see where the mistakes are made, and like if I have an idea of that, then that helps me filter out when I sit in meetings in the AI initiative, or we learn about new technologies, or even like outside of the AI initiative, right? And the whole, if you connect with anything that's happening in the wider sphere, you start to realize, okay, maybe this could solve this problem, or maybe this could help this problem, but it's a kind of, there's an element of kind of keeping up, but also being selective, and like one thing I have found that helps is testing wherever you can. In my day job, I've like tried to bring things from Drupal, put it in front of people who I know are struggling with these issues, and literally do a 15-minute test, and you can tell straight away, is this going to help, or is this actually going to make things worse, just from the vibe. And then take that, when you watch people use things like that as well, it sticks with you. So that is a really important, it's called user exposure hours in UX land, but it's a bit jargony, but just seeing people use your stuff is the best way you can understand, okay, yes to this, no to that. And so that's the kind of, that's something we should all be doing, right? If we're making things, there's always people that are interested in, we have a huge Slack channel, huge Slack community, you can get on a Zoom or a huddle, and just like show people what you're building before you get too far into the weeds of refining it, because you'll then start to, and the more you can reach out to people who like are not necessarily AI devotees. Some people love it, some people hate it, it's a bit Marmite, and then some people I think are undecided, and it's the undecided ones I'm kind of most interested in, because they're going to critique it from a point of view, does it help me? Is it worth the effort to do something different? Do I feel confident with it? So, and again, that like links into behaviors as well. But yeah, sorry, that was a kind of non-answer to your comments. Hopefully that kind of helps leverage something. There's a question over there.
Hello, yeah.
Hi.
Thanks for the talk.
Thank you.
And I am a contrib module maintainer, and I'm looking at Context Control Center.
Yep.
And I'm in a dilemma of understanding if I should treat this thing as a config or content. Have you been through this?
Not really, but if I am interested in how people use it and perceive it, because and I'll be honest, working with Kristen Poll, who developed it, and Aidan Foster, who helped as well, the three of us are like very much like blindness into the architecture, and we were using our own use cases to try and inform the architecture of it, like viewing how we would use it. So it would be interesting to like chat and think about like what you're asking, and to maybe see it in like a use case. To understand if I can help you answer the question, because in terms of the technical side of it, I would need to, I wouldn't feel confident answering on behalf of somebody like Kristen, who's been much more involved.
Yeah. Actually, it's more about like a meta topic. I understand that, because I want to know, like, is it my responsibility to like maintain those contexts and provide it to my users,
Right.
or do I expect the user to do it?
It depends what you mean by user, I guess. So it's like if you give somebody the keys to your context control center, then they can control the context items, they can control the scope, and I would say, depending on how the site setup happens, and we were trying to think of all the possible, like obviously permissions can be applied, and you could apply that throughout, so you would ideally want somebody like a site manager or a site owner having, defining this person can access this context because this is the like area of the site they look after, or this is the thing they look after. Or if it's your own site, then you can control exactly which parts go where. But we need some like solid, this is how it applies to a website, this is how it applies to a digital experience, to be able to tease out like where the I don't want to use the word guardrails, but you know what I mean, like where the boundaries are, and how that has to be factored in.
Thanks.
Last question.
That helps.
Thanks.
It's not so much a question. First of all, how can we clone you? I suppose that was a question.
You wouldn't want that.
With all of these new things, and the previous question, there's AI best practices module that's being developed as well. And I think if we can work on documentation early
Yeah.
to connect the dots between how do these new things all interact with each other, how can you use them, then we can
All figure it out together.
we can encourage more contribution and take some of the burden from you, from Kristen, and people who are doing lots of the grunt work.
Yeah, I think it's a balance in the community, not just with the work I'm doing, but just, when you keep it neat, a small number of people work on something, you put something out in the world, and then it inevitably kind of grows arms and legs when it gets used. But I think it's getting used to that. And one thing I struggle with at the beginning is people will ask, like, how can I help? And when you're in the emergent stages, you don't really know, because you don't know yourself. So you can't give somebody a list of tasks to do, because a lot of it is sitting in meetings, listening, understanding, making connections, and that requires a lot of kind of background knowledge that people do have. So, like, I think it was mentioned in one of the earlier talks, like making connections and thinking about, if you don't know the answer to the question, who can you ask? I think that's something that we can all do to put each other in contact with where all the knowledge exists.
Ask questions in issue queues and tag them with documentation.
Yeah.
And then we know what we need to write.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you.